What's up, everybody? Love Coley coming at you one more time. As promised, I want to talk about the prison industrial complex, and namely this article, which you should read. It's called Madness, because it is madness. It is crazy. And I think this article is about the Florida prison industrial complex and mainly about the mental facilities that they're within the state. But it also kind of ties in to what we're seeing nationwide with just a power overreach with police officers in general. I will not say that about all cops on the street are bad. I'm not trying to say that at all. I think what we're seeing right now is something that's been going on for a long time, maybe even hundreds of years. But since we all have cameras on our phone now we're actually seeing it live on air, on our Facebook feed, on our YouTube feed. We're seeing it in real time, and we're actually seeing what people are dealing with on the streets. And that is not to say that all cops are bad. I certainly do not believe that. Nobody does. It's just that that doesn't mean that they should be able to get away with blatant murder, and we have seen that. So I will go into a discussion about the article and what sort of tactics are used to control and violate people's freedoms and people's rights. And then I'll also tie into down below where I'll list the article here where you can go read it, and I'll also list a couple of videos in a playlist all about the prison industrial complex, which I believe we'll go through a little bit later on as well. So let's get into it. This article is dated May 2nd, 2016, and talks about the Dade Correctional Institution. Basically, within the article, you're talking about a psychological facility where all the patients are prisoners that are mentally ill. They're unstable. So you have a correctional institution which has a third-party company come in with psychologists to help train them back into, I don't know what you would call normal psychology, and be able to hopefully be able to work a job later on. That's the idea. So first, let's talk about some of the tactics that are used to control the psychologists from these third-party companies. The main one that's focused on in the story in the beginning is a Harriet, and I cannot say her last name, so I'll call her Harriet K. And when she comes in there, she is met with basically a feeling in the air right away. These people are treating her as a lower individual. They do that by acting aloof and letting her know before she hears anything that the prisoners are wrong. They're always wrong. And they even have a name that they call you if you start to believe the prisoners and what they're saying. And this is before she's ever met one prisoner, mind you. They call it a hug-a-thug. So if you're on the side of the victim, you're a hug-a-thug. So that's already psychologically inducing a state of, oh my goodness, I need to make sure that I am not listening to these people, that I'm only doing my job. So it already puts them in the corner, so to speak, in this whole thing. Another tactic that is used to control the psychologists themselves is money. Obviously, using a third-party company that wants to keep the contract, and they are sending people that will do the job without, starting a big fuss. So they send these people, and Harriet talks about how poor she was for a good 2/3 of the article. Well, not 2/3, but at least an entire page. So, you have a lady who really needs the money. You have a third-party company who desperately needs the money. And so that way they're putting an area where they can't fully express themselves because they need money. And now enter these prisoners who really need help, and they start saying, we are not being fed. And so the first thing is to say, oh no, that can't be true. What I learned from before is that these people are just going to say things. So that's how it all started. A quick mention that the 3 states with the top amounts of prisoners are Texas, California, and Florida. Florida being number 3. And in the article, they do go back through a little bit of history of how the prisons became America's dominant mental health institutions. by the 90s, because the Supreme Court said you have to provide them with mental care, but didn't say how or why or, what the process should really look like. So the first experience that Harriet talks about is just mentioning to the head officer that the prisoners are saying that they're not getting fed. And it wasn't anything against them. She just had a meeting. But in doing so, they left her alone with inmates without any protection a few times, and she could have been touched, and she was touched, and luckily she averted any really bad scenarios, but they could have done a lot of different things to her. And so that was the guards' way of saying, look, don't talk about these issues. And that's the exact reading that she took from that experience. Now, back in 2012, in June, there was a Mr. Darren Rainey who pooped in his cell, and he refused to clean it up. This particular inmate, Darren Rainey, had lost touch with reality and had flat feelings. In order to punish him, they put him in the shower. And so one of the punishment tactics they use is this hot shower where they control the temperature and bring it to hundreds of degrees to burn the inmate. And that's exactly what happened to Miss Darren Rainey. He was in a shower, a very hot, scalding shower, and actually didn't die of burns, but rather died of no oxygen. Obviously, when you have more and more steam in the air, you lose all the oxygen in the air and you can't breathe, and so he suffocated to death. And before he did that, he was letting out screams of terror, which an inmate below him did hear. Now, the inmate that heard him below, his name was Harold Hempstead, and he suffered from OCD. So he relentlessly preached about what he heard and what he knew to be true. What he said to friends, family, media, attorneys, anybody who would listen. He said, look, they put him in the shower, he was screaming, and he died. They murdered him. Over and over and over until it finally made the paper. It made the Miami Herald. So in May of 2014, Julie Brown of the Miami Herald finally published an article on this matter. After it became apparent that there was abuses of power within this system, stories just started pouring out about abuses of power in this system and all systems in America. Finally, it got the attention of the Human Rights Watch organization. In May of 2015, Jamie Fellner, JAMIEFELLNER, from the Human Rights Organization, titled the report Callous and Cruel. And in this report, he goes through all of the tools that are routinely used to incapacitate and punish 360,000 prisoners with serious mental illness, using full body restraints, chemical sprays, stun guns, extended solitary confinement, and more. Within this entire report, they talk about beating people who are handcuffed, beating minors, just beating the crap out of people for no reason. And we can't leave out sexual abuse either. There was a inmate named Richard Mayer who was forced to stick fingers in holes while they laughed at him. So they told him to put his own finger in his own butthole while they laughed. So just a lot of sexual assault, beatings, everything you could think of that's bad. And it makes me angry because I know that these are my tax dollars. My tax dollars go to make sure that people will stick their finger in their butt so that they feel worse about themselves. You know, how are people like that ever supposed to re-enter society and get a normal job and have a normal family? It's just not even possible, and so my tax dollars are going to a fraud. I will link the article below, and I will also link the playlist that I've created on my channel called the Imprisoned Industrial Complex, so that you can see more. But right now we're going to go through some of those videos with my comments, just so you can see a quick overview of how rampant this abuse of power is. And in the last part of the video, we're going to talk about where this sort of stems from.
Out. According to the article, prisons have become America's dominant mental health institutions. The situation is particularly extreme in Florida, which spends less money per capita on mental health than any state, with the exception of Idaho. Meanwhile, between 1996 and 2014, the number of Florida prisoners with mental disabilities skyrocketed by 153%. According to Bureau of Justice statistics, an estimated 56% of state prisoners, 45% of federal prisoners, 64% of jail inmates suffer from mental health issues. For more, we're joined by two guests. A.L. Press is with us. He's just written this article for The New Yorker. The piece is called Madness.
If you want to see the full interview, you can go to the playlist listed below. I just want to continue on and see what else is wrong with the prison system.
Let's truly understand our prison system. Even fewer realize that within the walls of prisons across America, an entire workforce has been developed, one that works for third world wages and actually accrues massive amounts of debt. Debt that can send someone back to prison even if they've served their time.
So this particular report is done by RT, and it's obviously talking about the third world wages they pay these guys and how they can get into debt while still in prison. If you want to see more, again, check the links in the description box below.
Between 1970 and 2005, the US's prison population grew by a massive 700%, far outpacing both population growth and crime rates. Today, it's got to the stage where America is home to 5% of the world's population, but a quarter of the world's prisoners. And not only does America have the highest imprisonment rates of any country in the entire world, but it also has the highest rate of youth incarceration. Over 130,000 juveniles are detained in the US every year, and on any given day, there are more than 70,000 youths in detention. But the biggest winners of this mass incarceration haven't been the American public, but the private prison companies who are making giant profits out of people being in jail.
And again, you can continue to watch that, the links down below. But the point is that if you put profit into locking people up, naturally you will see the incarceration rate just skyrocket.
With an estimated 2.4 million people behind bars, the United States reportedly incarcerates more people than any other country. According to a recent Supreme Court ruling, overcrowding is creating unsafe, unsanitary, and violent conditions, while medical and mental health care is being compromised. So how did we get here? Why are so many U.S. citizens in prison? Over the last 40 years, the prison population in the U.S. has risen by 700%. This is largely due to changes in drug sentencing laws that started in the 1970s. The zero-tolerance narcotic policies resulted in a dramatic increase in prison numbers. Half of federal inmates and 16% of state inmates are locked up on drug-related charges. Long sentences and mandatory minimums are also a factor. Many states have variations on the three strikes law, where repeat offenders automatically receive life sentences for their third felony. Rules have stayed in place despite studies showing that longer prison sentences and higher incarceration rates have little effect on reducing crime. These policies disproportionately affect minorities. According to the NAACP, about 58% of the male prison population is made up of African Americans and Hispanics, yet these minorities make up only a quarter of the American population. Racial minorities are more likely to be arrested and convicted, and once convicted, they often face harsher sentencing than their white counterparts. A more recent development affecting prison overcrowding has been the growing number of privatized institutions.
I wanted to show that one because of what she says about, the rate at which we incarcerate Black people. It's just astronomical in comparison to how many African Americans there are in the nation.
Our main story tonight concerns something Americans simply can't get enough of: prison. We love prison so much, a shocking number of Americans are currently inside one, as we learned last week during a House Judiciary Committee hearing.
Our nation now has the greatest number of prisoners of any country in the world. Nearly 1 in every 100 adults in America is in prison or jail.
We have over 2 million people behind bars right now. We have more prisoners at the moment than China. We don't have more of anything than China, other than, of course, debt to China. And it didn't always used to be this way. Our prison population has expanded 8-fold since 1970. The only other thing that's grown at that rate since the 70s is varieties of Cheerios. F*** you, fruity Cheerios! Look, our prison population has exploded for a number of reasons, from the dismantling of our mental health system to mandatory minimum sentence laws, which help explain why 97% of people plead guilty to federal crimes rather than risk going to trial, to, of course, drugs. Because half the people in federal prison are there on drug charges, and it accounts for 1/4 of admissions to state prisons. Our drug laws do seem to be a little draconian and a lot racist, because while white people and African Americans use drugs about the same amount, a study has found that African Americans have been sent to prison for drug offences at up to 10 times the rate. It reminds me of a joke. You know, black people who commit drug offences, they go to jail like this, whereas white people don't go to jail at all. So many people are incarcerated in America right now that it's become one of the things that Sesame Street has to explain to children.
My dad's in jail.
So as you can see, a couple more factors as for how they get so many African Americans in jail just using nonviolent drug offenses. And that's why President Obama has wiped the slate clean for a good number of them, but it will still continue until we change the laws. This is in regards to solitary confinement.
More commonplace in the U.S. to confine inmates in isolation for 23 hours a day. At the end of May, 7% of the 217,000 inmates in the U.S. federal prison system were placed in solitary confinement. That's according to a new report put out by the Government Accountability Office that examined the unknown costs of that practice. The report was drawn up at the request of 3 congressmen: Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings, and Virginia Congressman Bobby Scott, who all highlighted the lack of public information on the practice.
I'm standing here in a cell just like the one that Private Bradley Manning was held in for over 300 days, a 5-by-11 cell with just a toilet and a cot. Prisoners eat here, they sleep here, and most of the time they're alone. For 23 hours a day, only getting out for an hour or so to exercise. The Government Accountability Office released a report last month. Solitary confinement is used when a prisoner is considered a danger to himself or to others, or if they have gang affiliations. A day in this tiny cell costs as much as a night in a hotel room. It can cost taxpayers $120 to $216 per day for just one prisoner in solitary confinement. That adds up to roughly $78,000 a year to keep one of these individuals locked up.
Again, you can go to the link below to check out the rest of that. So you can see how rampant this is. There's lots of money in it. There's lots of abuse in it, and there's lots of sick people locked within the system for no reason other than drug offenses. That's where the prison industrial population shot up. And all of our tax dollars are paying for this, and I feel that we should be outraged. But probably a lot of things that are going through your mind, or that these are some of the things that went through my mind, are like, why does this happen? How does it not end up being helpful? How do we throw money at the problem and no problem gets solved? What you'd really have to dig into is psychology. What sort of psychology approaches us as we put on a badge, as we're being told that we're better than a specific group of people. When you take on a role of superiority, you really have an ability to be corrupted just over time. They say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that is the truth. This particular documentary is called The Science of Evil, and it really seeks to see where this superiority complex comes into play and how it becomes a sick, disgusting, perverted way that we treat other human beings that we are told we're better than. Let's take a look. Okay, so I wasn't able to actually find clips of The Science of Evil, but this is the actual DVD cover. It's available on Amazon.com for $20. I highly recommend it. It is such an eye-opener, and it really explains what happens over time as power begins to corrupt us. And the main study that's highlighted in the film is a study by Philip Zimbardo, and it's a famous Stanford prison experiment. And I did find a clip that goes through a little bit of that, so we're going to take a look at that.
A lot of definitions of evil. Mine is it's about power. Evil for me begins with the exercise of power to intentionally harm other people psychologically through discrimination, through prejudice, through rumors, to hurt physically through torture or beating up, to destroy mortally, to kill. And most evil is really done not by people but by systems, by governments. And
most evil is done
to
by
commit
government.
crimes against humanity. Now, I'm going to talk about the situational forces, as Dacre alluded to, and I'm going to describe some of the research I've done and my colleagues have done, which says we have underestimated the power of situations to transform good people and move them across that line. So I want to begin with a case study of evil, because evil is this vague thing. Everything is evil.
Notice he said, take good people and transform them into bad people.
Years ago, we all saw on television these horrific scenes of American men and women soldiers brutalizing, degrading, humiliating prisoners under their control in a strange place called Abu Ghraib in Iraq. When those pictures were shown, the Bush administration, military administration said, this is the work of a few bad apples, a few rogue soldiers. It's not systemic. Now, you know it's a lie because they can't say it's not systemic without having done an investigation. They couldn't do that in the hour after the films were released. But this is a documented case of evil. Now, I looked at these and I said, hey, I have seen these same pictures, similar, in the Stanford prison experiment, which I did 30 years earlier. Prisoners stripped naked with bags over their heads, guards sexually abusing the prisoners. And so I said, maybe the soldiers were good, and maybe it was the barrel that was bad. Because as you'll see later on when I describe the Stanford prison study, we knew on day one, we went to great lengths, only have good apples put in the bad barrel that we created.
So this video is a 10-minute video, not too bad, and again, it's going to be in the playlist that I'll link down below. But just to go over really fast, he proves that there's no such thing as bad apples. Good people do this stuff over time when they're placed in a sick, sour scenario where they're having control over other bodies whom they believe to be lower than them. It's just systemic. It happens to everybody. You, me, anybody. He also goes on to say that the systematic power creates the evil. You create a scenario where these people deal with the lower people on a daily basis, and over time they become addicted to the power. And he'll say that in there that this exercising punishment and being sick and committing evil becomes a source of enjoyment for the guards. They get a psychic benefit out of hurting and demasculating other human beings. And that's where it gets really sick. He goes on in this particular video to explain the experiment that he created, but the way it ended is completely radical. Actually, another Stanford professor had to pull him aside and say, look, you've become sour and sick. You, with this power over this science experiment, you have lost your mind, and you are allowing evil and creating evil, and you're not stopping it. It has gone too far. And finally, he said, oh my God, you're right. I have become part of the evil that we're studying. And he shut it down. It's tough to watch. But, you know, in conclusion, we've seen evidence that systematic abuse is just rampant. It's rampant in our nation's prison system, our Defense Department, and probably maybe some other areas that we're not even talking about here in this video. And we see signs of that. We see signs of it when we see the most recent story that comes to mind is an autistic child wandering out, and a black therapist coming out to rescue him, and the cop shows up and shoots the therapist with his hands in the air, and then the cop says, "Oh, I was aiming for the autistic kid." You know, so we're seeing lots of evidence of abuse, and then we've seen evidence that it's not a bad apple scenario. Very good people end up in this system of organized abuse, and they succumb to it. They end up just doing what everybody else is doing. There are a lot of good cops out there, but it doesn't mean that they can't go rogue. If it's become normal and natural in our society to behave this way as a police officer, then they will. It's a matter of time. We have to look at the system of organized abuse and it's the way it's organized in the government, and then we have to look at the fact that you and I are paying for this to occur. This sort of sick, twisted, sour thought process that's going on is really something that has to be addressed, and it won't be by Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, because we can't really do anything until we clean up our political system, and we can't do that until we get money out of politics. So that's a whole nother video in and of itself. But I think the first step is to know about it, and that's why I make these videos. The first step is to know about it and to talk about it with people you know and love, and just to understand it so that we understand what's going on. And then we have to fight against the normalization of this process. It's not okay to treat people, other human beings, this way. Not in this country, not in any country. And that's my message for you today. It's a little bit of a heavy topic. I swear a couple new videos will be coming out that are way happier. And in an effort to combat all of this stuff, I do go to activist meetings. I do meet up with locals around the area in LA. And I implore you to do the same. If you have no idea what to do, I understand it's kind of a weird process, activism. It's not so centralized, and it's kind of, we fly by the seat of our pants, really. So that's how it works, but it's a good thing because we don't want too much of a system, as we can see what happens. Check out Jill Stein for the Green Party, or I believe there's a Libertarian Party as well. I'm not into them, but you can check them out. And take care. I will see you in the next video. Peace.